Welcome to another conversation in People in Fundraising. This podcast features interviews with nonprofit professionals who discuss their career journeys, lessons learned, and enthusiasm for working in fundraising. And here's your host, the founder of People in Fundraising, Tim Wilson.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tim Wilson. It is Friday, February 3rd, 2023. Thank you for participating in another conversation with the People in Fundraising webcast. And today I'm really excited to welcome Rachel Brandell-Mayers to our program. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Tim.
It's good to see you.
Likewise.
Yeah. So thank you. Rachel and I know each other through Apra International. We've worked on the online content committee for the last 2 years. Currently, we're co-chairs this year, and it's been a lot of fun getting to know you, getting to get your expertise, the enthusiasm you bring to the profession. And this was my first time serving in a leadership position on an Apra committee. So you've been really good at bringing the newbie along, and I appreciate that.
Of course. A pleasure working with you.
Oh, thank you. Likewise. So for several reasons, I wanted to interview Rachel. And one of them is that she is in a recently new position for her. She is the executive director of prospect development at Virginia Commonwealth University. Today, in our conversation, you may hear us call it by the full name of the institution or VCU, the acronym. And also, Rachel, you are the first person I've had on my program representing the state of Virginia. So go Old Dominion.
Yay. Do I represent, have you had someone from Pennsylvania?
I had Jessica Wade.
Okay.
Yeah, last summer.
Because I could technically represent both.
That's true. Let me
This
think.
is what remote work does. How do you handle it, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Where in the world are you?
You're one of the few then to be representing dual states. I was trying to think, is there a word like bi-coastal or biannual for states, but I couldn't think of it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, Rachel, if you could just spend a few minutes at the start of our conversation talking about how you entered the nonprofit profession and what about it attracted you with skill set match and interest. And then if you can take some time as a follow-on, telling us about the number of people you work with, manage at VCU, that would be awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, I'd be happy to. So I've always been really interested. Well, growing up, there was an Ani DiFranco song that really meant a lot to me. And there was a specific lyric in the song that said, I do it because the world owes us nothing and we owe each other the world.
Wow.
Yeah, really meaningful.
Yeah.
And I feel like that really struck a chord with me. I still remember the exact verbiage. And so that's been a driver as I've made decisions throughout my career. And so when I first got out of college, I had a really strong interest in college, I studied sociology and psychology, and I had a really strong interest in working with children.
Oh, okay.
And so I did AmeriCorps for a year at a program that was providing Waldorf childcare to children whose families were stabilizing from homelessness. And that was really, really challenging work because, I was 21 and I thought that I could go to California and love these children and fix their lives.
Sure.
Which is certainly not the case. One person can't fix years of trauma that someone experienced. And I also learned a lot about all of the like homelessness was kind of the least of a lot of these children's problems. They had a lot of traumatic experiences that were like sort of adjacent to that experience of being homeless, but not, directly correlated. So like we had one child who was raped before she was one. We had another child whose dad was addicted to drugs and would leave him in a closet for days at a time, without changing his diaper. Like, so lots of really challenging stuff and things that children should never experience.
Sure.
And so one of the things that I learned from that was that it was really difficult for me to set boundaries between the work and myself. And it didn't feel like it wasn't the right fit for me. It just wasn't right. And so then I also have always had this really strong interest in food. So I went and got a master's in food culture after that. It was kind of like, it felt like a really huge contrast. Like I did this thing for these kids and then I did this thing for myself.
Sure. Yeah.
And then I started working in kitchens, and I was a pastry baker at this company called Zingerman's in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And Zingerman's is really well known in the small business world for its innovative business practices. So they practice open book finance and have lots of opportunities for employees to learn outside of what their position is. So like I was able to take classes on merchandising and pricing and like all of these things that are related to running a food business.
Sure.
Which was really fun. And then I met a friend who was making these beautiful cakes. She graduated with a bachelor's in fine arts from the University of Michigan and was starting a cake business, but she hated the business side of things. And I was like, well, I'm taking all these classes and learning this stuff and I'm interested in it. Can I help you? And so I started helping her, and then that turned into a full-time position. And what I ended up realizing having that position is that what I really enjoyed about the work was the business building and the sort of like, this is where we want to go. What are the things that we have to do to get there? And we got the business to pretty much to the, like there was still growth that she wanted, but there wasn't significant growth. And that was the part that I really liked. And so it was time for me to move on. And I very randomly found this job at the University of Michigan doing prospect research. And as I learned more about it, they were talking about, as I was interviewing, I was learning about how it was helping fundraisers create strategy and use data to achieve their fundraising goals. And it seemed like a really good fit. I had no idea at Michigan, development is like a 500-person operation.
Oh my goodness.
It's a machine. It's probably even more than that now. And so, my experience with fundraising was telefunds, like people calling me, asking me for $50. I really had no idea how the sausage got made. And it's fascinating. And it's a really great combination of like my interest in serving the world, and I have a really strong belief in higher education in particular and public education in terms of like giving everyone access to higher education. And so it turned out to be a really great fit in this way that I never could have anticipated.
That's awesome.
Long-winded answer, sorry.
No, it's fascinating to hear, and that's one of the main reasons why I've launched this endeavor, is to get stories about how diverse career backgrounds and skill sets are that then translate into new opportunities in the nonprofit world. So really cool. And how long
there
were
was
you?
Another. Oh, sorry.
No,
go ahead.
No, you go. This is your
I
interview.
was just going to say, there was another part of your question, right? Did I answer the whole thing?
Yeah, sorry. You're right. The second part was how long you've been at Virginia Commonwealth, what the team structure is like, how many people, is it siloed?
Um, so I've been at VCU for 7 months now. My team, the prospect development team, someone left in December, and so when we're fully staffed, we're 9. Right now we're 8.
Wow.
We're hiring. And so we have a prospect management team and a prospect research team. And right now, prospect management is 3, prospect research is 3. And then we have one person who has like a split between prospect management and prospect research, but her work is specifically focused on supporting the medical philanthropy team.
Oh, okay. Really cool.
Yeah.
And so my follow-up is VCU is obviously in Virginia, and you mentioned being from Pennsylvania. So I assume there's remote, fully remote, hybrid options for you and your team. And how often are you on campus?
Yeah, so I'm technically fully remote, although I do go to campus there's nothing like being in person, as great as Zoom is.
Yeah.
And so I don't have a defined schedule in terms of how often I go. So far, I've been there about every 6 weeks
Okay.
in person. And my team is pretty much remote Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and they go into the office on Tuesdays. But
Okay.
outside of my team, we have some teams like our gift and records team and our information systems team are pretty much entirely remote.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And go into the office like on occasion, but really are based at home.
Oh, interesting. Because in my day job, I'm at Weber State University in Ogden, Utah, and advancement services, gift processing, they're on campus every day. And I don't know if that's preference or what. I'm on campus 2 days a week, but so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few people from GRM who go in on some. Sorry, I said GRM, gift and records management.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes it's so easy to drop the lingo.
Right.
We have some people who go in, like once or twice a week. But for the most part, most of the team is remote.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And before you joined VCU, Rachel, how long were you at University of Michigan?
9 years.
Wow. Awesome.
Yeah. In varying roles, but yeah, my time at Michigan was 9 years.
Excellent. So coming out, so now a decade in the nonprofit world. So very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Goes fast.
It does. Especially when you add in volunteer leadership, I imagine, too. So with the online content committee, OCC, to drop another acronym. So
yeah.
Let's talk for a moment about managing a team in this hybrid and remote structure. So 7 months in at Virginia Commonwealth University, what have you observed, learned in terms of what works well, the frequency of connecting with your team, any things that after 2 years of Zoom and such, anything that still took you by surprise or had to adjust your way of thinking?
Mm-hmm. Well, so when I first went remote with Michigan, which was actually before COVID because we relocated to the East Coast.
Oh, okay.
And actually, when that happened, Michigan was, I asked, if I could work remotely, and it was this huge deal, and I didn't know if I could do it, and I was managing people, and they're like, well, we don't know if you can keep managing. And then, 6 months later, everyone was remote, and it was really a non-issue.
Yeah.
But one of the things that was significantly different about my experience going remote with Michigan versus VCU is at Michigan, I had really established relationships, right? I had been there 6 or 7, probably 6 years at that point.
Okay.
So had really deep relationships. And so, it's different trying to maintain relationships remotely versus build relationships remotely. And so I think I used a lot of the lessons that I learned at Michigan about just like how to maintain that connection, how to feel accessible to the team, while not making everybody like sit on a Zoom for 30 minutes every day so that we feel connected. That's like,
Right.
it's a tight line to walk because people also get really tired of being on Zoom all the time. And so how do you stay connected but not always be on Zoom?
Yeah.
And so what we've done at VCU is we have weekly huddles, and we always start with a rapid fire question, and they're like totally non-work related and just kind of like quirky questions like, do you like ice cream or cookies, or something kind of random but fun. And it's nice, especially on a Monday morning, to just like get people talking and hear about their weekends. And
Yeah.
I definitely, I have busy days, and sometimes I'm like in meetings back to back, which can make it hard. But I try really hard to, like, my team's pretty active in our G chat. And also like we G chat individually too. And so I really try hard to make sure to ask people about their lives and their lives outside of work.
Yeah.
Over G chat, or like when I have individual meetings with people, I always like to spend the first couple of minutes just asking them about how they're doing, or what's going on in their lives. And it's definitely not the same as being in the office, but I feel like 7 months in, like we're really starting to get to know each other and have like an understanding of our personalities and who we are as real people, not just work robots.
Yes. Yeah. That's good. I like those strategies. And I think, understanding who your coworkers are as people first and professionals come with that is really important.
Yeah, I think so too. Because people are whole people. They're not just people who work from 9 to 5 or whatever their hours are. And I believe it's really important to recognize and acknowledge that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was another big motivating factor or impetus for me to launch this series, is just to get the sort of human interest side of the people I'm talking with, not just like nuts and bolts of metrics or appeals or things like that. So
Right.
yeah. So Rachel, let's talk about again that kind of whole person self for a moment. We've talked about your new role at VCU, the Apra Online Content Committee, other maybe personal family pursuits. How do you strive for balance for all of those things that make you who you are? And are there any tricks you've learned that work well, or things that you're maybe with the new year you're thinking, how can I rebalance this portfolio in a way that's healthier?
Yeah, absolutely. That's been something that's top of mind for me, especially in starting a new job. There's so much to learn, and sometimes I'm have a little bit of a feeling like, oh, I'm not doing enough, or like I should be doing better. And so I've been giving that a lot of thought and thinking really carefully about what my priorities are, and also thinking about how I recharge and what's important to me in terms of like feeling relaxed and good about my life and not just worrying about work all the time.
Right.
Because we moved to the East Coast in September of 2019, so almost 4 years ago now. But we first moved to New York and just moved to Philadelphia in November of 21. So we've only been here for a little bit over a year. And so like that's one of the things that I've noticed I really miss is working remotely and being in a new place. I really miss the community that I had in New York and that we also had in Ann Arbor before we moved to New York. And so I've been thinking a lot about how to build more relationships and be really intentional about that. And also how to be, I mean, really, like when it comes down to it, for me, my values, I'm not someone who wants, I'm not like, I don't want to, I have no aspirations to be like Bill Gates or like, my biggest aspiration, I think, is to be happy. And so, thinking about like, what does happiness look like for me, and what does that mean? And I was finding that like some of the stress of work, or like the stress of getting to work in the morning, was affecting how I was interacting with my daughter. Like, being impatient with her and being like, well, could you just get out the door so I can get to work?
Right.
But really, when I started to think about my values, it's family first for me.
Awesome.
And so I've been trying to make a really cognitive effort. I'm also like I'm very type A. It's in my personality to like want to get things done. And so, I mean, this is kind of really ridiculous, but like when my daughter wants me to play with her, like, I don't really want to play. Like, I want to get all the things on my to-do list done, like, and I sort of like sit there and I'm like sort of playing with her. But what I'm really doing is being like, can this be over so I can go do all these things that I
can relate.
think I need to do?
Yep.
And so I've been working really hard at night when she asks me to play cards with her, and I feel like I need to do the dishes, to take the time to play cards with her. And I can do the dishes when she goes to bed. And it sounds really simple, but it's hard for me to do that. So hopefully that answers your question.
That does. And I'm so glad that you went in that direction with the answer, because I feel like I can totally relate. First of all, my wife and I have 4 kids, and I think before the pandemic, I was in that. My day was planned out. I gotta get out the door by X time to face a 45-minute commute down to Salt Lake City. And it was an organization that I really respect and learned a lot, but there was sort of a cultural vibe of like, be in the office, by X time. And that trickled down into my life, just as you mentioned with you and your daughter, about just impatience. And I'd come home after sitting in traffic and be like, I just need like 5 minutes to decompress. And the thing I'm finding, because I relate as well about playing with my children and having half of my brain elsewhere, is that they now do it with me. Yeah. And my kids they're teenagers up to, and then almost 12 and 9. And it's not so much that their brain is split in terms of a to-do list, but the distraction of screens and the enticement of screens is what I'm competing against now. Whereas in the past, they didn't know it, but in my head, I was halfway out the door or halfway onto my next to-do list. So different situations, but a similar feeling of how can I unplug myself and also now unplug them to connect. Because I agree with you, like family is first, it's a priority, and you do what you can day in, day out. So
yeah. I mean, it's so fleeting too. Like I don't want to be in a position where my daughter's 19 and not in the house anymore, and I regret, not having played cards with her at night.
Sure.
So I try to remember that. Sometimes it's hard.
It is, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that is a really interesting insight, and I think something that a lot of past guests and listeners can relate to as well. whether they've got young kids or older children or other family obligations, responsibilities. I think we're in very good and large company in that sense. So
I think so too.
yeah. Yeah. My follow-up question, because you mentioned it, and I love this, that be happy. That's what you strive for. And I feel like I need to pay Arthur Brooks some royalties. The Atlantic writer and Harvard Business School professor. You're mentioning about being happy is a very nice segue to another question here. And something that he mentions in his book, From Strength to Strength. And I'm going to read the quote, and as you listen to it, Rachel, and maybe you've thought about it ahead of time, I'd love to hear what you think about how this resonates with you, or what may or may not resonate with you. So the happiest people, according to Arthur Brooks and studies that he cites, have a balanced portfolio between four things: the transcendental, which is to say the spiritual things bigger than you, your family, your community, which is your service and friendships, and earning success through meaningful work that creates value. And I'll end the quote there. And you've touched on a few of those already, Rachel, with family being a new member of a community. You mentioned other communities earlier where you had good bonds. So are there things in that balanced portfolio of four that particularly resonate with you, whether that's transcendental, community, and the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I read an article by him recently. I can't remember where I found it, where he talks about how he reframed for himself mentally how he writes, because he writes a column weekly, I think. It was really interesting. Anyway, it's a good question, Tim. I've been working really, I think I was really heavily invested in work, and I've been trying to really focus on the community and the family pieces. And to some extent, the spiritual pieces. I think that's probably the area where I'm the least practiced, I guess I would say. But I do think the balance is really important. And I've noticed as I've been trying to work on some of these other things that it has really been beneficial to me in terms of just my overall feeling of well-being.
Yeah. That's awesome. Do you journal at all by any chance? I ask that just as it's an unplanned question, but it's a follow-up, like anything that helps you keep track of the progress you're making with this balance. Anything that you can reflect on later, say, I have been playing cards with my daughter after work for X number of times, or not so much like an analysis, but like, this is how I feel when I can unplug and connect with my family.
Yeah, I've been trying to journal more. I'm not as good about it as I should be. Also, my husband and I have a weekly check-in meeting. It's like an annual thing. We've been doing it for years. It's on Mondays. Monday evenings, and we have specific topics, but like these are the types of things that we talk about, and we are working on creating like goals for this year for our family, and also we have a set of values and like a vision for our life together, but those are also things that we like to revisit on an annual basis. And maybe we've been a little bit slack on some of those things since we had our daughter too. So that's been on our radar of things to do. So
I love that. And I admire you and your husband for doing that. I think that is so valuable because one thing my mother-in-law, this is getting like really personal. We kind of strayed quite a bit away from like work, but my mother-in-law is really good at sharing sentiments or expressions, or maybe it's an aphorism saying. And she said one time, and it's stuck with me ever since, that it's really easy to lose yourself and your spouse in these early years of raising a family. And so I applaud you for having that dedicated time with your husband, and whether the weekly as well as the annual, because that is so crucial.
Yeah, I agree with your mother-in-law 100%.
Yeah.
I think about that for myself, honestly, like, what are some of the things that I really love to do? And and what do I like what do I have the time to do, and like which are the things that are most gonna fill my bucket?
Yeah.
Exercise/yoga is another one that is pretty important for me in terms of feeling well.
Oh, awesome. That's really cool. And I think, that's something has tremendous benefit, and it can be hard to make the time to do it. But once you get into that commitment, that's got great dividends.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as you've been talking, Rachel, I just have been thinking what a diverse and interesting background you've had as a career, and the things that you mentioned that fill your bucket. And I don't think I'm forcing the segue here, but I've got a question number 9 here, from Time's Man of the Century, for those of us who are still around and can remember the 1990s. And
I remember the 90s.
Oh, good. Me too. And I remember a lot of the 80s as well. But Einstein, a quote from him, he once remarked that the important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existence. Now, if we can zero in on the social impact sector, the nonprofit world, what are you curious about in maybe specifically the job you do, the people you're working with, the institution, or maybe even, to a larger extent, what drives your questioning curiosity of work practices, donor behavior, volunteering, things like that?
Yeah, so one of the things that, this is me getting on my soapbox a little bit. I feel like I say this all the time, but I do really believe it to be true, is we are all bombarded with messaging in our lives, like in this digital environment that we live in. We like, sometimes I get stressed out about checking my personal email. It's like I have so much email that I'm dealing with at work, and then it's like, well, and then I have to like go through my own email, and would love to not have a personal email in some ways. And our for-profit colleagues are so good at using data to talk to us in somewhat manipulative ways in some ways. But for nonprofits, especially nonprofits like VCU, like the University of Michigan, who are doing so much really great work, the messaging becomes really difficult, right? Because how do you know which donor wants to hear about the Institute of Contemporary Art and which donor wants to hear about Medicines for All? And it's really hard to have the technological systems that our for-profit colleagues have to be able to communicate in those ways.
Sure.
But I am very concerned that if nonprofits aren't able to keep up, that they're going to really lose out on dollars.
Mm.
And so that's something that, like, from a prospect development standpoint, that I'm super interested in is like from a prospect development standpoint, how do we get better at really understanding donors' interests without having to do individual research on each of them?
Sure.
You know, what are sort of like the large data sets, like external giving, employment data, click-through data, social media interaction data, like the social media interaction data, at least at VCU, and it was at Michigan too, is really hard for us to use and like systematize. But it's also information that I think, especially the more sophisticated, like the millennials and the Gen Z, like they expect us to know what they're
Yeah.
talking to us about on social media. And we don't really have the system to be able to do that.
Mm.
And so that topic is really fascinating to me. And the other thing that I'll say, which is kind of similar, is this change that we're seeing in donor behavior. I find really interesting, and it's related to what I was just talking about. So, you know, we have like our old school, like baby boomer donors who were really interested in giving just because they're affiliated with the institution, you know, because they graduated from there. And that's really going away with the Gen Z and the millennials, and they care significantly more about impact,
Yes.
the impact that they're going to have. And that goes back to, you know, at like the $1 million plus level, sure, like we can give those people the attention to like really talk to them about the impact that they're having. When you think about someone who's giving like $50 on it, like an annual gift, you know, how do we communicate about the impact that that $50 has?
Oh, yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know, like I think about organizations like Heifer International, where like you're buying a chicken. And so you feel very sort of connected to that idea of like, well, I just bought someone a chicken. Like I know what I'm doing, you know, I know
Right.
where it's going. But I think
Absolutely.
at these like really large institutions that are doing all of these things, it becomes significantly more difficult to communicate that.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some of the bigger picture things that I get really excited about.
Yeah, that's clear as you were talking, just the enthusiasm you have for those topics. It's really well put. I think, you know, as a donor myself, you know, I'm not Gen Z certainly, but even I have that more of a theoretical awareness of the impact of my gift than I may have in the past, where it was tied to my alma mater or something else like that. So thank you for sharing those thoughts. We have about 5 more minutes, Rachel. Are there any topics you wanted to cover? Or I think your last response could tie into your experience yourself as a donor, if you wanted to share a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you bring that up because I was thinking about that a little bit as we were talking about the last question. And so I'm an alum of NYU, and, you know, I believe really strongly in higher education. And so I give to NYU every year. But to be honest, actually, I didn't give this past year. I still need to do that, and they keep calling me. So, but it's hard to know, like, as an annual giving donor at an institute that at these large institutions, what fund you're going to be really excited about. So, my husband went to the University of Michigan. His whole family went to Michigan, so we give to Michigan. And actually, I give to Michigan for us. He's not the one who does it.
Oh, interesting.
But when we give to Michigan, we give to this program called Wolverine Pathways, which is a program that supports students in high school who go to underprivileged high schools to provide them with some extra training and like structure to help them get into college And if they get
Awesome.
into Michigan, they get to go for free.
Oh, so cool.
Yeah, so cool. The only reason I know about that program is because I worked in development at Michigan. Like
Okay.
I don't think we would know about it just from like Drew being an alum. And I certainly don't know about any programs like that at NYU, although there may be some, but
Yeah.
I guess I don't have the bandwidth or the drive to like go and try to find something like that. And so I just give to like international student experience or something because
Mm.
I also believe in that. But I'm not nearly as passionate about it as I am about the giving that we do to Michigan because I think the Wolverine Pathways program is so cool.
Yeah, that does sound great.
Yeah. So it sort of just goes back to this, like how do you communicate with people not even just about the impact, but about all your various programs and how do you tell people like, oh, this is the program I think you'd really like to get, like
Right.
it's it's really hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that reminds me, I mean, not that anyone is interested, but this is a print of a building at my father's both alma mater and where he's worked his entire career. It's Bridgewater State University in southeastern Massachusetts. And I grew up with that campus in my backyard. And I didn't torch the place, but I certainly I loved running carefree with my friends and playing football on the quad up there, and I just had great experiences as a kid there. Didn't go to school there, but I, to your point about knowing which funds to give to, I went on their website a while ago and just wrote down all of the different funds and put it in a spreadsheet. I thought, okay, yeah, definitely like the student emergency pantry. That sounds like a real critical need. I love libraries. So yeah, at some point I will cycle through a bunch of those funds at that institution and just, give an annual size gift because it was such a foundational part of my childhood. But like you said, if the messaging isn't coming from the institution in a more tailored way, then the onus is on people like you and me to say, well, here's my affinity, and am I really going to take the time to search out the best fund in all of these different buckets that most resonate with me? So, and I think for you and me, where we work in nonprofits, that may be baked into our personality and feel like an easier fit to do that. But people outside social impact may think, well, they're going to call me, I'll give them $15 and end of the story. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure. It's amazing that you did that. I'm very impressed.
Well, thank you. I spend way too much of my life in spreadsheets. So,
That I can relate to.
well, Rachel, this has been really enjoyable to connect with you. We connect monthly in a meeting and then email and such related to the OCC. But to hear more of your story and to get a better sense of who you are as a person has been really fulfilling and fun. So thank you for your time today. I loved it.
Yeah, me too. Thanks so much for asking me, Tim. It's been really fun.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you. And for our audience, you can find Rachel's conversation on my website, peopleinfundraising.com, as well as on YouTube and LinkedIn the beginning of March of 2023. So until then, thank you for supporting this endeavor with comments and likes on the interviews that have been posted. And if you yourself would like to be a guest, I always love referrals. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. And thank you again, Rachel, for your time. And we'll be in touch soon.
Anytime, Tim. Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Well, I'm trying to end the meeting here.